Bill 1007, and I recognize the quorum of the board is present. Pension review board now comes to order. On our agenda, we'll do sorry. You don't want me to note the change? Oh. Okay. Our next item on the agenda is roll call. I will note for this, we have updated this agenda item. From now on, we'll be excusing members of the meeting in which they are absent in order to streamline our practices for future meetings and minutes. So, Ms. Seymour, will you please call the roll?
Stephanie Leiby.
Present.
Keith Brainerd.
Here.
Marcia Dash.
Here.
Christopher Gonzalez. Robert Reese.
Here.
Christopher Cook.
Here.
At this time, I'll entertain a motion to excuse Mr. Gonzalez from today's board meeting.
So moved. Second.
The motion is made by Mr. Cook and seconded by Mr. Brainerd to excuse Mr. Gonzalez from the board meeting. Is there any discussion on this item? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. I have it, and Mr. Gonzalez is excused from the November 21st. November 21st, 2023 board meeting. Mr. Gonzalez is excused. On to administrative matters, we'll consider the minutes from the September 21, 2023 board meeting. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to excuse the reading of the minutes.
So moved. Second.
Motion is made by Mr. Zook and seconded by Mr. Rice to suspend the reading of the minutes. Is there any discussion from the board? All in favor of suspending the reading of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The minutes will not be read and approved as circulated. At this time, I'll call on Mr. Brainerd to lead us through item 3B on today's agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a pension item for the updated absence process that you alluded to a moment ago. As you said, in the future, there will be only one item of roll call and possibly excusing absence. I would entertain now a motion to excuse Stephanie Leiby from the September 1st, 2023 board.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Ms. Leiby's absence from the September 21st board meeting. Okay.
Next up, still under administrative items, it's just a note that Mr. Gonzalez has been appointed as third member of our education committee. All other assignments all other committee assignments remain unchanged at this time. Next up, we have public comments. We ask that all public comments are limited to 3 minutes. If there's anyone in the audience, in person or virtually, that has any comments that they'd like to present to the board. Okay. At this time, I'll call on Ms. Tamara Aristine to present item number 5.
Morning, Chair members, Tamara Aristine, General Counsel, presenting on item 5, revisions to the board bylaws. First, an overview. The PRB has not completed an update of the entire bylaws in many years. The most recent updates were related to adjusting and removing committees to better reflect the agency's work and needs. I'm going to provide more information on the types of changes made in a few moments, but overall the changes include updates to comply with statutory changes, better reflect actual board practice, or make minor stylistic changes that are not substantive. I'll talk first about the substantive changes. We added information about the statutory provisions for holdover board members. When a vacancy occurs on the board and a appointment has not yet been made, that board member continues to serve until the end of the next legislative session. Next, we added some language to further distinguish between the board's policymaking role and staff's management responsibilities. This is an existing statutory requirement, and we clarified the respective role of the board and staff to ensure that we have the policy that is required by statute within these bylaws. We also updated the approval processes for board travel. This pertains to board member travel outside of board meetings, which is a rare occurrence. For many years, the General Appropriations Act had specific requirements for approving such travel, which had been incorporated into these bylaws, but these requirements no longer exist in the GAA, so we removed them accordingly. Instead, we created a process for board members to work with the executive director on such travel arrangements. Next, the legislature has modified the Open Meetings Act in recent years to create requirements for board members and agency employees appearing via video conference at board meetings. As you all know from these meetings, there must be live video and audio of all board members and employees participating remotely, broadcast at the meeting. The presiding officer must be present at the physical meeting location, which must be open to the public, and there are provisions for technical difficulties. We added these requirements to the bylaws. The Open Meetings Act was also modified to specify how members of the public may give public comment at a board meeting by video conference, which we also incorporated here, along with our requirements for members of the public to provide a registration form giving us basic information before giving comment. Recent Open Meetings Act changes also include general requirements for public comment, which we included in the updated bylaws as well. The bylaws now also include information about excusing absences from board meetings. As you saw just a moment ago at this meeting, absences will now be excused at the meeting at which they occur. This is how most other agencies handle excusing absences, and this will make our minutes more accurate because they will reflect the absence and excusal in a single minutes rather than minutes for two substantive. Finally, these substantive updates include modifications to the committee responsibilities to provide additional detail about the types of roles each committee plays. So, for example, for the actuarial committee, the bylaws now specify that the committee provides guidance on matters pertaining to funding soundness restoration plans, funding policies, and intensive reviews of systems. Next slide. Okay, next I'll quickly discuss the non-substantive changes to the bylaws. First, we moved items throughout the bylaws to better organize the document. We made minor stylistic changes like capitalization, phrasing, and citation styles to align with our stylistic standards. We also moved statutory references to footnotes rather than including them within the body of the bylaws to allow for easier reading and reference. And lastly, we updated references to staff titles to better reflect which staff are responsible for assisting the board. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Any questions or discussion from the board on the updated bylaws? I have this time, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the pension review board bylaws as updated by staff.
So moved. Second.
Motion has been made by Mr. Zook, seconded by Mr. Rayner, to adopt the updated pension review, or to adopt the bylaws of the pension review board as updated by staff. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the revisions are adopted. At this time, I'll now call on Jasmine Loomis to join the consent stage to present on item number 6.
Good morning, board members. My name is Jasmine Loomis. I'm a research specialist for the PRB. I'm joined today by Tamara Ehrenstein, the PRB's general counsel, to present our updates on our agency overview for the minimum educational training program and the investment expense reporting rules. As a reminder from the previous meeting, state agencies are required by law to review their rules on a 4-year schedule. The board approved publishing our intent to review rules in the Texas Register and opening our rule up for formal comments from stakeholders in the September meeting. Although we did not receive any formal comments, we also did ask and receive informal comments from stakeholders. Since that formal comment period has ended, the PRB staff have met to start brainstorming potential changes for our rules, focusing primarily on MET and investment expense reporting rules, where we expect more extensive revisions. Today, I will present to you a few potential changes to the MET rules. The first set of potential.
Right, can I ask a question about that?
Yeah,
When's the last time for review
As a whole or the MC rules?
as a whole?
2019.
The first set of potential changes relates to definitions and core training. Staff has identified potential improvements to the definitions and terminology within our MET rules for clarity. A potential modification identified by staff includes altering the requirement for trustees to retake core training after they leave a board. As a reminder, core training covers key pension and governance topics and must be completed by trustees and system administrators within their first year on the board. The current rules state that if a trustee or administrator is not serving on the board or employed by a system for more than 2 years, they are required to restart their MET requirements and start with their core cycle. The board could consider modifying this requirement to allow for more than 2 years to elapse before the core requirement resumes, which would match record keeping policies for sponsors and hopefully increase trustees' compliance. Another potential change is adding an additional core course for new trustees and administrators that acts as an introduction to the PRB and statutory requirements for systems. This idea was brought up by Ms. Dush and Mr. Rees during the last education committee meeting, and it is something that staff believe could greatly benefit systems. The potential addition could also increase compliance and create a better understanding of how the PRB interacts with systems. Next slide. The next set of potential revisions deals with compliance, periods, and deadlines. Another suggestion for rule review that came from the last education committee meeting was to streamline MET cycles to follow a set schedule like the calendar year, rather than data fire for each individual trustee. This potential change would mean that start and end dates for cycles are consistent for all trustees, which would make becoming compliant with MET easier and make administration for PRB staff easier. As a part of this change, the board could also consider changes to reporting deadlines for MET reports. This would include the MET activity form and include adding a reporting deadline to the board composition change form. Currently, any changes in board composition are meant to be sent to us within 30 days, but we have found that this isn't the case for a lot of systems. We believe that making this form do along with the MET activity form will increase systems compliance by ensuring that we have the right trustees on file so we can accept their training. Next slide. These potential changes pertain to sponsor and course accreditation. We received some input from systems about altering the requirements for retirement system sponsors who provide in-house MET training to their board members. Some of the current sponsor requirements may not make sense for systems to follow. We believe that there may be changes that could be approved by the board to make it easier for systems to provide MET training to trustees and increase compliance. Lastly, we are considering altering the dates that systems can submit individual course approval applications to the PRB. The reporting deadline for this application is not strictly followed and causes challenges for sponsors and systems trying to receive MET credit for a course, as well as trustees and administrators who need to comply with MET requirements. We believe that this potential change will ensure that the PRB gets the information needed and participants can obtain MET credit for those courses. That's all that I have for you today. If there are any questions at all?
Can you give us some idea of timeline?
Yeah, so Tamara is actually going to present next about the timeline for MET rules.
Thank you.
So I have a question and maybe, an extension for what I would like to see, in potential rule changes. I know when we had prior discussions about MET and MET compliance, one of the things that became abundantly clear is that once a trustee becomes out of compliance, it becomes very difficult for them to come back into compliance. And so I would like staff, and if we do, delegate this function to the education committee, to kind of keep that top of mind as they work through any proposed rule changes. So that if there is an instance of non-compliance, there's an easy, viable path forward for someone to come back into compliance and then continue, with their compliance.
If there are no further questions, I will hand it off to Tamara. That will be timeline. Thank you, Jasmine. I'll talk next about the timeline and process for the review of the MET and investment expense reporting rules. Jasmine touched on this already. We're seeking stakeholder input throughout the process. Statute, of course, requires formal input from stakeholders on the rule review and any proposed rules, but we're also working with stakeholders more informally as well to be sure that any changes are made thoughtfully and workable for stakeholders as well as we plan to meet with stakeholders next month to discuss the potential rule changes that Jasmine presented on and any other ideas that they may have, particularly for MET rules. That brings me to the timeline for the rule review for these two rules. If the board so approves today, we plan to present the draft rules to the appropriate committees next spring. For the investment expense reporting rules, that would be at the April 25th, 2024 investment committee meeting. For the MET rules, we would present at the May 9th, 2024 education committee meeting. And we would also provide these draft rules to stakeholders after the committee meetings. Staff would then make changes as needed to the draft rules based on input from the committee members and stakeholders before bringing the proposed rules to the full board on July 25th, 2024. We anticipate that final adoption of the rules would then occur at the September 25th, 2024 board meeting. This isn't on the slide, but as a reminder, we plan to bring recommendations on all the other rule chapters currently under review to the board on March 6th, 2024, and any rule adoptions results will be in July. That concludes our presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
So I just have a question, to make sure I understand what you just said. So for all of the other rules that staff will review outside of the rules that were sent down to committees, those will be independently reviewed by staff. Proposed rules would be, or proposed revisions would be brought to the board in March.
Yes, those rules are less substantive. We have many chapters of rules that just pertain to general administration of the agency and don't have this level of impact on stakeholders. So these two chapters are where we have anticipated that there may be more extensive revisions. So we're taking a little bit more time with those to be sure that we get input from stakeholders and the committee members. But we did not think that would be necessary with the other less substantive chapters that we had.
And what were the dates again
for those other chapters.
Right.
So those would come to the board, our recommendations on March 6th, 2024. That's the first board meeting next year. And then the adoptions we anticipate would be at July 20th.
And before you come to the March board, will you have solicited informal feedback from the community about any proposed rule changes for those rules?
We hadn't built that into our plan, but that's certainly something we could look at if we do anticipate that there are going to be potential changes there. Absolutely.
Sense. Okay, at this time, I'll entertain motions to direct staff to work with the education committee on the MET rule review and with the investment committee on the investment expense reporting rule review and possible revisions to be presented to the full board in 2024.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Mr. Reiner, seconded by Mr. Zook. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it and the motion passes. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Reiner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to call on PRB staff actuary in speed. Present items 7A and 7B. Reading one.
The key, the staff actuary here to present the actuarial valuation report. So we have several systems in the pension system news. Beaumont Fire increased the city member contributions and introduced a new tier. So those contributions increased substantially. Since 2020, the city's increased from 16 to 20%, and the members increased from 16.5% to 18%. Its response to the amortization period reduced from infinite down to 67. And so it's nice to see that progress. The members in city will need to submit an FSRP by September 1st, 2025 to get down to 30. Cleveland Fire increased their city and member contributions and got their amortization period below 30. Colorado River Municipal Water District, they had a substantial decrease in their funded ratio from 87% down to 62%. What appears to have happened is they paid significant lump sums in 2022. Those members, I believe, were able to lock in an interest rate below 2% for all of 2022, and so they got substantive lump sums much greater than the value of the benefits based on the actual evaluations.
David, before you move on, we go back to Beaumont Fire. I would be interested in knowing they've increased member contributions, and they've introduced a new tier of benefits, presumably lower benefits. I would be interested to know if the new tier, the normal cost for the new tier of benefits is less than what members are being required to contribute.
So currently, in most valuation reports, they do not report separate normal costs for the different tiers. They just submit an overall normal cost. But we could request systems that have multiple tiers to provide us a normal cost by tier.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. I do think that would really add transparency to what is the effect of these new tiers.
Okay, we will request that in the future.
Thank you.
On the next page, Colleen Fire, they increased their member contributions from 11 to 12%, and they also changed their final average salary definition to use consecutive periods. So under the old definition, where firefighters could use the highest pay periods from any time, the actuary actually had to load the liability to account for any selection. So by changing that, even without changing the multiplier, they lowered their amortization period from 28 down to 21. Laredo Fire, they completed their FSRP, so they increased the city and firefighter contributions. They excluded overtime pay in the best way by including it for contribution purposes, but excluding it for benefit calculation purposes. They reduced the maximum benefit and increased the drop age and service requirements. All in all, their funding period decreased from 57 down to 26. But then similar to Galveston Fire, they're back at risk with a 31-year amortization period after the 2022 return scheme. Longview Fire also completed an FSRP. You might recall they received $45 million in July 2022. At that time, they also instituted guardrails such as no benefit enhancements until they reach a 5-year amortization period, and no benefit enhancements until that raised the amortization period above 10 years. All that happened in 2022, but they submitted the FSRP in June of 2023, so that's why they're. Midland Fire, those members voted to fix a pay definition issue that had been recommended by the actuary for years. So similar to Clean Fire, they reduced their liability without changing the benefit multiplier. So changing just the definition of pay can have a significant effect. Also note is their mayor has said she plans to propose a 2% city increase in contributions in their December 12th city council meeting. Northwest Texas has told us they're beginning the process of plan termination, so we will just stay in contact with them throughout that process. And then lastly, Paris Fire, we received an audit report that showed the pension obligation bond had come through into their assets, so they were 100% funded as of December 31st, 2022.
Mr. Fee, excuse me, can you remind us, Paris Fire, is that a plan to close, switch to the TMRS?
Yes, all future contributions go to TMRS. And so there's still a liability for anything accrued through 2022-ish.
So they're 100% funded for the folks who are in the plan.
Yes, and so they need to stay diligent to maintain that because they haven't purchased annuities. So they still need to, watch their investments and make sure they earn those returns to stay up.
And new hires are in the system.
Right.
Thank you.
So next slide. Significant economic assumption changes. So we have 6 systems that changed their discount rate and or payroll growth rate since June. Colorado River Water, that's our first increase in a while. So they bumped up their inflation assumption from a low 2.25% up to a reasonable 2.4%. And overall, the expected return increased from 5.5 to 5.75. The rest are all decreases, which continues the pattern of recent years. Of note is Sweetwater, who had been the loan system at 8% or higher. So now we have no systems at 8%. Progress slide, there's quite a bit going on this. So below each bar, you can see the average discount rate for all our systems at that date. And then for each bar, you can see funding periods below 30, funding periods between 30 and 39, and funding periods 40 or above. And then we have a line showing the aggregate funded ratio from left to right. So overall, despite a 16 basis point decrease in the discount rate during the period, the percentage of systems with a funding period of 30 or under increased from just over 60 to around 75. And then the percentage of systems with funding period of 40 or more decreased from almost 30 to barely more than 10. The aggregate funded ratio increased from under 77 to over 79%. It's still possible to see some hiccups as the 2022 returns come through, but we have had several come through that's already part of this, and in general, everything's moving in the right direction. So system overview by type. We have 7 statewide systems. They remain level with median expected return of 7, median amortization period of 26, and funded ratio of 84%. We have 42 Telfer systems. They improved to a 7.25 expected return from 7.38 in June. Median amortization period improved to 28 from 30, and funded ratio improved from 63 to 64%. Municipal systems, 17 systems, remain level with 7% expected return, 25-year amortization period, and increased funded ratio from 76 to 77%. We have 34 810 systems that increased, that remain level at 6.63%, 10-year amortization period, and 87% funded ratio. And overall, everything remained roughly level with a 7% expected return, 21-year amortization period, and increased funded ratio from 73 to 74%.
David?
Note, this is the first time since I presented this slide that all systems have a median amortization period of 30 for each type of system.
David, this is Marcia Dush. I find the Telfra numbers kind of surprising that the median amortization period is only 28 years. And yet the funded ratio is extremely low at 64%. How can this, can you comment on how this is happening?
Yeah, so you can see the statewide Telfra and municipal systems all have fairly similar amortization periods, but very different funded ratios. And so what I would say is that the Telfra systems have our highest contribution rates. So even though they have the lowest funded ratio, they're making up for it at a higher rate than the other types of systems.
David, if I can interpret that, effectively, the Telfer systems as a group are paying more for their benefits than the others are. Is that a safe statement?
Yes, and we'll see that more when we get to the employer normal cost slide later. But yes, they pay on average a higher percentage of their benefits.
Because the overall plan's gotten significantly behind, and so now they're having to catch up. And so the employees are bearing a much larger responsibility than the other systems. That's fine.
Yes, but they are able to reach those 30-year amortization periods, but both the members in the city often increasing to fairly high rates.
Understood. Thank you.
So expected return on assets on the next slide. So we'll have several bar charts like this. So as a reminder, there are 7 statewide systems. So each quartile bar represents around 2 systems. There are 42 Telfra, so each bar represents around 11. There are 17 municipal, so each bar represents around 4. And then there are 34 810 systems, so each bar represents around 9 systems. And if we only have 3 bars showing instead of 4, then a full quarter systems are right there at the median. So for expected return on assets, these are pretty unchanged since June, except for Telfra. The Telfra median and top line moved closer to statewide and municipal. That's what we want to see, because the more achievable the expected return is, the more likely the amortization period will remain on track. So here we have systems with a discount rate above 7.5%. So Sweetwater did come off this list, as we discussed, but we'd expect the rest of these to come down over time. They're either already aggressive compared to expectations based on their current allocations, or their allocations may need to change to more conservative investments as the plan matures.
David, this is Marcia Desch again. Before you go on, I would like to direct a thought to Mr. Zook and the investment committee. One of the things that I would be interested in, or that I think would again help improve transparency, would be when a fund promotes it, essentially establishes its discount rate, shows the analysis that it gets there. It would be interesting in time when this is, when we're able to also show the expected standard deviation associated with that discount rate. Because I think, when you promote, when you say your assets can earn 7 3/4 or 8%, it would be interesting to know how much risk you're taking associated with that asset allocation to get that level of return. And then benchmarking that against similar systems or whatever. I don't know if the investment committee has thought about something like this.
Thank you, Ms. Desch, and definitely we'll talk about that in our next meeting.
And the other thing is liquidity. It also seems to me that, if you just do a estimate based on the asset allocation, you get one level of risk. But if you have, particularly if you have negative non-investment cash flows, there's a lot of risk associated with being able to earn your discount rate if in fact you have to sell assets in a down market in order to make benefit payments. And again, I would encourage the investment committee to think about how to factor in liquidity issues into the discussion of investment strategies.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next slide. Expected payroll growth rate. So the higher the assumed payroll growth rate, the lower the amortization period. So one thing to note on this slide is that Telfer systems have much higher expected payroll growth rates than the municipal systems. In general, Telfer represents rural and suburban areas, while municipal represents large urban cities. So the question is, does it make sense for the Telfer growth rates to be expected to be higher than the large cities? And in some cases, I think that's definitely true. Conroe would be an example that's growing much faster than Houston. But I think there's others where that's not the case. So all in all, I'd probably expect the Telfer ones to lower over time to be similar to municipal. Another thing you might notice is on the 810 bars that there's only two. So there are 34 810 systems. 17 of them have active accruing benefits, and less than half of those actually use the payroll growth assumption. So more than half actually use level dollar amortization. You may also notice that a lot of our systems, every type of system has a range down to 0. So for Telfra, the Woodlands Fire actually uses level dollar amortization. And for statewide, ERS and Tesers now use level dollar. So on this slide, we have systems with actual 10-year payroll growth missing expectations by more than 1%. So when there's no experience to match the assumption, there's still some ways to support it. One would be if you have a growing city that would require a growing police and fire department to match that pace. And another would be if your payroll growth assumption is no higher than your inflation assumption. If there's a problem there, then it's with the inflation assumption, but not with the payroll growth. So Atlanta Fire, Corsicana Fire, and Texarkana all meet that inflation requirement. And then Austin Police and Houston Fire both meet that city population growth. So the two remaining are Big Spring Fire and Marshall Fire. We have had discussions with Big Spring Fire, and they do plan on lowering that. But it turns out they had an offsetting assumption. So while their high payroll growth rate assumption was lowering their amortization period, they also had an equally high individual salary increase assumption that was increasing their amortization period. And so they don't actually expect a major shift once they reduce both of those. Marshall Fire, we're expecting a new valuation report soon, and we're hoping to see a lower rate, but don't know what to expect. Amortization periods. One thing you might notice is that all the diamonds are under that 30-year line. So that's nice to see. And then for Telfra, you can see that 3/4 of the systems are actually either below 30 or very close to 30, looking like 3/4 are under about 34. And then for the municipal, it's the same thing. 3/4 of the systems are below around that 34 line. So we actually have quite a few approaching 30 or already below. These are our systems with funding periods greater than 50 years. So LECOs and JRS at the top, they are actually both fully funded through the General Appropriations Act, so we would expect them to come off this list. Midland Fire, they've started making changes, but have ways to go for the SRP. Atlanta Fire, we believe, is at around a 40-year amortization period after their city contribution increases. They'll need to get down to 30 by 2025. Sweetwater Fire is working on their FSRP. Nacogdoches has told us they really have no source of new contributions, so that's why we're showing them as infinite now. Dallas Police and Fire is working on their FSRP, and the independent actuary actually presented 2 weeks ago to both the city and the board. Beaumont Fire has reduced from infinite down to 67, and we'll need to get down to 30 by September 1st, 2025. Brownwood Fire has a preliminary agreement for a 4% member contribution increase. We haven't seen a vote on that yet, but that's what we understand. Corsicana Fire, the city's exploring the contribution increase. And then Dallas employees is another of our systems working on an episode. Laredo and Longview were removed from this list after they completed their episodes.
Mr. Fee, at the top of the list are the statewide plans, and you note that they were fully funded through HB1, so, basically the legislature brought out their unfunded liabilities, and they come off this.
That's true.
Thank you.
So this next slide, these are systems with funding periods less than 50 years, but they're contributing substantially less than the amount to avoid negative amortization. So to avoid an expected increase in the unfunded liability, you need to fund your normal cost and the interest on the unfunded liability. So all the systems on this slide fall short on that. So as an example, if you look at the top at Marshall Fire, their interest on their unfunded is $1 million, their normal cost is $500,000. So they would need to contribute $1.5 million just to stay at a level unfunded liability, but they're only projected to contribute 1.1 based on their contributions. So these funding periods on this slide are based on future contributions that are significantly higher than today's contributions. So the top 5 do that by having a payroll growth rate of 3.5% or higher, and the next 4 do that by having a second tier of benefits. When you introduce those new tier of benefits, it does lower things, but it takes time for that lower normal cost to come through. It happens more in the later years than in, next year or the year after that. So these systems must remain diligent because the unfunded liability will not decrease anytime soon. Note that the 2 Austin systems both follow an actuarial determined contribution now. They will come off this list once they get through those transition periods.
How long is that transition period?
I believe the way Austin Police did it is that they were targeting 30 years, but they did it sort of like targeting like around a 27-year period, 3 years in the future. And so they were going to ramp up over those 3 years to get to that 27-year amortization contribution and then get it going forward.
So you're saying 3 years they'll come off this list?
I don't remember when that period started. So I think they're already
27, close to 3.
right. But I think they may already be in that. So maybe 1 year. I can't remember when it started.
Oh, that's right.
So on this next slide, we have an illustration of what a 30-year amortization period looks like. So this chart illustrates the amortization of a $7.5 million unfunded liability using a 7% expected return and 3% payroll growth. So this is pretty standard assumptions for a lot of our systems. So you can see that starting out at that $7.5 million unfunded liability, it actually grows to almost $8 million by the 9th year. And it's only in that 9th year that you start seeing an actual decrease in the unfunded liability. And then it's not until year 15 where that unfunded liability drops below the original $7.5 million. So it becomes really important that these systems reach that 21-year amortization period in year 9 where they can start seeing a decrease. It's important they reach that 15-year amortization period in year 15 so they can actually start making progress. And it's important they get below that so they can really start seeing those decreases towards 0.
David, can you tell me what this graph would look like if they used level dollar amortization without payroll growth?
Right, so level dollar would look a lot more like a 30-year mortgage, where you would never see it increase. You would always be paying off something, and it would always be going down.
So what are some of the implications for a plan deciding between level dollar and what you see in this chart?
The nice thing about level dollar is you're starting to pay it off right away. The reason a lot of use payroll growth is because it does make some sense to assume to try and always target the same percentage of your pay, but it also means that your significant contributions are going to be later years versus earlier.
Thank you.
Members, I think that this chart really provides a service illustrating how permissive 30-year amortization period is, which is policy. It says we treat 30 years with great reverence. 30 years, you have to do it. Even 30 years, look how long it takes just to begin to make progress on enterprise. That's assuming some level of payroll growth. I think we're going to be hearing in a little while about changes to the funding guidelines. that are issued by this. GASB has recognized the problems of the 30-year amortization period, and as this board moves, excuse me, in the direction of reconsidering our funding guidelines, I think we should keep this chart in mind. This is really a very generous and liberal way of allowing plans to pay off their unfunded liabilities. We think that for a lot of plans, the funding period remains north of 30 years. I mean, they're not even near the on this chart. It's very generous, very permissive. I think that this board is really going to have to consider clamping down on the period of time that citizens are expected to amortize their unfunded liabilities. Because if we don't, we're kicking the can down the road. Thank you.
Mr.
Certainly target decreasing that period. It's very important. You know, to stay level at 30, you can see that you would never actually.
David, this is Marcia. Again, this illustrates why my concern about when we're talking about funding policy, about having a rolling 30-year amortization benchmark for funding policy, because again, to the extent that a fund has a loss, and as long as they can demonstrate in the succeeding year that they're still, within 30 years, their unfunded may have grown, but they're always starting a new 30-year policy, which means they're never getting to attack, they're never getting to that 15-year mark where, they can start bringing down their unfunded. And so I think this really does illustrate my concern about having a rolling 30 benchmark in your funding policy.
I would agree. So the next slide, actuarial terminology. So this just lets us go through some key terms: present value of future benefits, the present value of future normal costs, and the actual accrued liability. So in our example, we're looking at a member with 10 years of service already worked, and he's going to work another 15 for a total of 25 years of service when he retires. So if we're talking about present value of future benefits, we're looking at the whole pie. So we're saying, what is the amount of money we need today to fund all 25 years, even though they haven't all been worked? When we talk about the actual accrued liability, that's the Astros Blues section. And that is the 10-year, that's just based on the 10 years he's already worked. So that's how much money he needs today to fund the 10 years he's already worked. And then in the Astros Orange section, that's the remainder of the present value of future benefits, and that will be recognized over the next 15 years through normal costs each year. So this just gives an idea of why we always want to be targeting 100% of the actual accrued liability, because we're just talking about the money we need to fund the service that's already been worked. So on the next slide, funded ratio. So this is the actual value of assets divided by the liability. So the goal, as we just stated on the last page, is we want to be 100% funded. Most of our systems are in the 60 to 100% range. In general, TELFRA and municipal systems have the most struggling with the funded ratio. You can see that the middle half of TELFRA systems are between around 50 and 75% funded. And the middle half of municipal systems are between 60 and 82% funded. And we'll take a look at the systems in those bottom quartiles on the next slide.
David, before we go, putting this slide and the prior slide together, so when we talk about 100% funded system, we're talking about a system that has funded 100% of the, I'll go with Cubs blue section of the pie chart on the prior slide.
That is true. We're talking about 100% funded of the Astros blue section.
And what's striking to me on that is that the importance of staying 100% funded on, I'm sure among other things, but intergenerational equity stands out. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, so if you imagine only being 50% funded of that blue section, then the members today are having to fund not just the Astros orange section that they were supposed to fund, but also half of that blue. And so it's extra work for them to try and work that out.
Thank you.
So we can move on to systems with funded ratios below 50%. So systems on this slide all have a total funded ratio under 50% and a retiree funded ratio under 100%. So when the retiree funded ratio is under 100%, that means there's no assets remaining to support the active members. Actuarial methods, of course, call for member liabilities to be 100% funded the moment they retire. So you find as a percentage of pay while they are being paid. Any amount not funded by retirement falls on taxpayers and future members.
So is the status of Paris gonna change? Or are they gonna stay at the top of the list?
Now, Paris, as we mentioned in the news, they are now 100% funded that we can see in their audit report. And once we get a valuation report that shows that, we'll take them off this list.
Thank you.
David, if you could go back to that slide. I would just point out to the other board members that this is my heartburn slide. These are the funds that I think the actuarial committee and the board should keep a close eye on. And I know many of them are working through their issues, and some have in already done contribution improvements, whatever. But when you have a funded ratio below 50%, I mean, that's very frightening in my book. So I would just say these are the ones we really need to keep our eyes on.
Thank you, Ms. Gush. I think we agree. Mr. P.
Yes, I would agree with that. And also the ones on this next slide where these are systems that they're slightly better than the previous slide. They have a funded ratio greater than 50% at least, but they still have that retiree funded ratio below 100%. So again, there's no assets remaining. If you prioritize the retirees first, there's no assets remaining for the active members at all. And we do expect Northeast Medical Center to come off this list. They have terminated the plan, and they did fund it before doing so. And we're just waiting for reports that show that. And then LECOS, of course, with the Appropriations Act, will come off this list.
And JRS2 also?
And JRS2.
So the slides on the left-hand side here, I mean, the systems on the left-hand side of the slide, these are the real problematic ones. Midland Fire, they're projected to run out of money completely, roughly 2040. Is that fair saying? Nothing changes?
Yeah, okay, so we're moving on to the next
I'm
slide.
so sorry, I got a slide in. I'll wait, there we go.
Okay, yes, so, yes, LECOS will fall off this slide. Midland Fire, Sweetwater Fire, and Dallas employees are all working on FSRPs. And yes, Midland Fire is projected, according to their audit report, to run out of assets at around 2040. Wichita Falls Fire is there a little above that. JRS2 will come off the list. Beaumont Fire, they're again submitting an FSRP by 2025. Austin employees, the audit report for some reason didn't reflect the legislation, but they have moved to an ADC, so they will go off this list. Capital MTA also, we expect the next audit report will come off this list. DART and Nacogdoches are interesting because we know they have depletion dates because they have a blended discount rate in their audit report, but they didn't disclose as required what that actual date is. So we've used 2099 as a placeholder, although certainly for Nacogdoches, it would probably be much sooner.
Is there a way to deduce or to estimate the exhaustion date based on variables or factors that go into that blended rate?
Well, that blended rate uses their normal expected return up until the point where they're projected to run out of assets, and then it uses a municipal bond rate thereafter. So the lower that blended rate, the earlier that exhaustion date is.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Can I just clarify with the exception of salary employees in that county social district? Are all of these other systems and exhaustion years, the years that have been reported to us by systems?
They were reported in their audit reports. So this is the employer normal cost slide that we referenced earlier. So the normal cost is the percentage of pay it would take from data hire to data retirement to fund the member's retirement benefit. It's an estimate then of what the annual cost to fund the benefit during the employee's working career. So if the total normal cost is 16% and the member is paying 12%, what we're showing is the net benefit that they're actually getting above what they're paying. So you can see most systems are between 4 and 10%, but for the first time since I presented this slide, the median SOFR system is actually dipped below 4%.
Is it possible to never bar below zero on here?
Yes, it is, but I just arranged it to not go below 0. And so we can go over some of that on the next slide.
Thank you.
David, this is Marcia Dush again. You know, it's my impression that many of the TELFRA plans, the members don't participate in Social Security. And again, what do you think? Is it like half of the plans or more than half of the plans that do not participate in Social Security?
I'm not sure for the 810 municipal and statewide, but for TELFRA, I would say it's probably about 25% do participate and 75.
75% don't. And so that the average, again, you know, there are 25% of the plans in here that are participating in Social Security. So that means those employers are kicking in 6.45% of pay to Social Security, and then perhaps, you know, part of their contribution to this fund is in addition to their contribution to Social Security. So what bothers me is that if there are TELFRA plans where the members do not participate in Social Security, where the employer contribution is less than 6.45%. Again, I think Christopher Zook mentioned benefit inequity. Here's a situation where I really think we need to do a little more looking at the benefits being provided, especially to those members who are not covered by Social Security. Thank you.
So on this next slide, 100% here would be identical to 0% on the previous slide. So that's the point at which members are paying exactly what the cost of their benefits is. So when this number rises above 100%, the members may be paying more than the cost of their benefits, but also paying past members' benefits. Now this can be skewed by high discount rates. So 7 out of the 12 on this list have returns, expected returns of 7.5%. And so where Orange Fire is at 7.75%, if they were at 7.5% instead of that 115%, may actually be closer to 100%. So they'd still be on this list, but it wouldn't look quite so drastic. Harris Fire, of course, will come off this list. Port Arthur was added and Denison was removed. But these are the systems that are paying, you know, a large portion of their own. This is the employer percent of the recommended contribution. So the recommended contribution for a lot of our systems is the amount that it would take to have a 30-year amortization period. For some, it's less than that. In June, I said it was the first time I had seen the median of each type at 100 or above. So now is the first time I've seen the median of each type above 100. So that means more than half of each type are contributing toward a defining period over 30. So these are the employers contributing less than 80% of the recommended contribution. So I'd actually originally said 90% is the cutoff, but there were too many systems to fit on the slide, so I moved it down to 80. But now that we've had 5 systems drop off, plus LEGOS and JRS coming up, we're only going to have 5 left on the slide. So there's a good chance the next time I present the slide, I'll use 90% as the cutoff, so we can actually have more systems on the slide. Which is good.
I'm sorry, can you clarify the time frame this started? Is it 1 year, 10 years?
This is the last year that we're showing in our contribution report.
Most recent available data.
Correct.
Thank you.
So now we'll get to item 7B, the FSRP updates. So we had several status changes. Laredo and Longview Fire both completed their FSRPs. We added 4 to systems at risk. That includes Austin Fire, Greenville Fire, Nacogdoches, and of course Laredo Fire that had just completed their FSRP. And then we have 2 that came off the list. Cleveland Fire now is at a 25.6 amortization period, and Lubbock Fire is at 24.8. One interesting thing that happened was Orange Fire submitted a valuation report using market value of assets, and they had a greater than 30 amortization period. So we did send them an at-risk letter, but we also mentioned to them that the rules allow them to use the greater of market value or a smooth actuarial value of assets. So they did resubmit a report using smooth value of assets, and they did come down under a 30-year amortization period. So we no longer consider that system. So in August, we sent letters to each of the systems that were subject to the FSRP to remind them to submit progress updates by September as required by the statute. So Atlanta Fire let us know that they've increased city contribution rates by 2% each year. So starting at 13% in 2021, they're going to get to 19% by 24. They'll likely need some more action to reach 30 years, but that's a substantial increase. Beaumont Fire is meeting with their plan sponsor to discuss options. For Elmwood Fire, the actuary had recommended a 4% total contribution increase. The members ended up taking the brunt of that and took on all 4% by themselves. And we don't have confirmation yet of any votes on them. Can you have one slide?
Oh, apologies.
Like, let me know.
Oh,
We go to
right here?
the FSRP progress updates, a couple of slides. That
I'm sorry.
Dallas employees. Dallas employees, they submitted several key dates. So they have a working group to discuss their benefits to present to the city council. And then in February 16th, the city council will vote on those changes. And then in May, they will seek voter approval. Dallas Police and Fire is working with their independent actuary. Midland Fire did change some pay definitions, and they did reduce their ADC by 6.9% of pay, but they'll need several more actions to reach an amortization period of 30 years. And then Sweetwater Fire just let us know that they're studying potential changes to both their contributions and benefits.
David and Dallas, are you saying that the citizens must approve whatever changes are proposed? Those take back.
Yes, that's the way.
So the city council sends it to the voters. And voters have to approve.
Yes. So these are systems immediately subject to the FSRP. So they have a combination of valuation reports above 30 years after September 1st, 2021, or above the previous threshold of 40 years prior to September 1st, 2021. And we just did all their progress updates on the previous slide. Next, we have systems at risk of a 30-year FSRP. So these systems all have one more valuation report. If they submit above 30, then they will be subject to the FSRP. Austin employees, we expect to come off this list due to their ADC. For example, if the Laredo Fire was above 30 in September 30th, 2024 evaluation report, then they would need to submit another FSRP. They would likely not need, substantial changes because they're already close to it. Next, we have systems with amortization periods between 30 and 40. So these are not yet considered at risk because they've not had a valuation report above the threshold applicable at that time. but they are above their last valuation report was above the current threshold of 30. So they would still need to submit, 2 consecutive valuation reports above 30 after September 1st, 2021, and then it would become subject. Then we have our legacy FSRPs, so Plainview, Fort Worth employees, Wichita Falls Fire, and Marshall Fire are all following legacy FSRPs with target dates ranging from 2026 to 2031. And lastly, these are our systems that previously completed FSRPs, so we added the rate of fire Long Beach Fire to this list. That concludes my report.
I'll go back to the slides. The progress report for systems that previously submitted FSRPs, the legacy FSRPs. Can you tell for these systems, like you show the amortization period when the FSRP triggered, and then current progress, and then target date for when they expect that amortization period. Can you tell if these systems are still making progress to that goal, or if that progress is slowed, stopped, or reversed from the data that we get?
Well, we know that when they submitted FSRPs, the target amortization period at that time was 40. So you can see that 3 are already below that 40 target. So they definitely have been making progress. Marshall Fire, is at 41, and we'll see what happens. We're expecting evaluation reports soon.
And so do you anticipate additional progress being made, or because the FSRP was targeted for the fact that these systems are below 40, we're not expecting any further reductions?
I'm hopeful that these systems will be able to get below 30 before they come off these legacy FSRPs, but there's certainly no guarantee, and Marshall Fire would be the most average on this slide, given they're still over 40.
And so the target date is to get the 40,
But basically, with the new legislation, we can consider them to have a target of 30 by these target dates, because if they're not, then they'll be subject to the new requirement of 30.
On that same issue, David, 2022 is a lousy financial investment. So 2 here that did not have a valuation is a 2022, manually Plainview and Marshall. We haven't seen their 2022 experience after that crappy investment year. So their prospects for this would be dimmer than the others who are incorporated. With that.
I do, and that's why we did create the corridors under the rules to allow them to have some fluctuations and still be considered compliant with these previous FSRP. So it's possible that they could have a bad performance year and still be considered compliant.
Brilliant. Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Fee on that comprehensive and robust report? Thank you very much. I'd now like to call on Mr. Brian Burnham to present item 7C. Mr. Burnham, welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, board. I would like to present the reporting and compliance. First, I have an overview of the fiscal year 2022, some of the data, total net assets, investment returns, system membership that we've received from all the reportings from 2022, now that the majority of those are in. Not a shocker due to the investment landscape of 2022, the current assets has dropped to just under $350 billion for our 100 defined benefit plans to the state. The investment returns for the 1 year, the average was around negative 10.5%, but in the 10-year has dropped to about 6 1/3 from just around 7% the previous year. System membership, we have about just under 1.5 million actives, and we're looking at just under 1 million inactive members who are waiting on benefits or contributions refunded, and then about 874,000 annuitants, for a total of just over 3.3 million total members. Next, I'd like to talk about our non-compliance policy. So we send reminders out to our systems 60 and 15 days before the reporting deadline is due. If those systems do not send the reports by their deadline, we send out non-compliance notices 15 and 45 days after that deadline. Then staff will contact systems when the reports are 60 days past due. We mail a letter to their system sponsor, and we publish the system name on our list of non-compliant plans over 60 days on our website, which is the statutory requirement. Other options that we may do, systems may be asked to appear before the board to discuss non-compliance if the board, at the board's discretion. And the PRB does have subpoena record, does have the power to subpoena records or other documents according to section 801 205, but that's to my knowledge that subpoena power has. Next, I'd like to talk about the reports that were due July 30th, 2023, which was our December 31st, 2022 fiscal year end plans. In total, we had 9 non-compliant systems over 60 days. We called all 9 of those systems late September, so just before that October 1st date when they would all become 60 days, to notify them of their status. 2 of the systems stated that the drafts were done for their audits and that they were just waiting on the boards to adopt their final reports. We've since actually received, it says 1 here, but we've since received 2 of both of those, and both are sent compliant. The second one was actually just last week that we got it, which is why I didn't get up for this. There were 7 systems waiting on reports to be drafted, and we've actually now received 3 just as of yesterday that are now compliant and have fallen off that 60-day non-compliance list. We sent letters to the system sponsors through certified mail, and we also followed those up with an email to the sponsors of the system. 6 letters were sent in total, which covered 8 different systems, and this is because 2 of our sponsors, Capital Metro and City of Dallas, they sponsor it's basically they're the same governing body for 2 systems, because Dallas Police and Fire has a combined plan and a supplemental plan, and then the Capital Metro plans have an administrative employees plan and bargaining unit employees plan, which is since closed. On the next slide is our list of the non-compliant plans. I'll start with Nacogdoches County Hospital District Retirement System. They have been non-compliant since 2021. They were also due at the beginning of this year because they're not a December plan, but they're actually a June fiscal year end due plan. Their situation is that they sent us in 2021 a sponsor audit of the entire hospital district as a whole, rather than an audit of just the retirement system. And it was, I believe it was 2013 that the legislature made a rule that the audit needed to be of the actual retirement system itself and couldn't be of the sponsoring entity in order to fulfill that requirement. They have let us know that they are working on the 2022 audit for the retirement system, but there has been no status update on when they think that. For Midland, they are another one that was non-compliant for 2 fiscal years. We're still waiting on the PRB 1000 for 2021. They have sent a PRB 1000 for 2022, as they have gotten new investment consultants who are able to gather the data and put that report together for them. We've asked them if they're going to be able to put that data together and get us a 2021 report as well. They said they can, but they haven't yet sent that to us. As far as their audit, they've been working on it. They were delayed due to GASB reporting requirements with their actuary giving it to their auditor. Their auditor we've been informed now that their auditor does have those numbers and is working on it and expects to get a draft to the plan by the end of this month. For Arlington Employees Deferred Income Plan, their situation actually, and you can see by the due date that they were another January 27th of this year. So they were a June fiscal year end date plan and not the December like everybody else on the list. Their situation was that They had a lot of turnover in their contacts that deal with the reports and getting the reports to us. They generally work out of the Human Resources Office within the city of Arlington, and they were not aware of the reporting requirements. So we had to recently update them on those reporting requirements and get them up to date. And they've since sent us an audit, but the audited report did not contain the investment expense disclosures that are needed according to the statute. And they also need to send us the PRB 1000, which is the capital metro plans. Yes.
So is, when you run into this is where the report, the audit doesn't contain kind of the information that's necessary to come into compliance. What's the remedy? Do they just stay out of compliance, or I would imagine they don't go back and redo the audit?
No, so we reach out to them and we inform them of the issue. So the investment expense disclosure issue doesn't specifically is not something that necessarily needs to be audited, because when we wrote the rules for those disclosures, we allowed them to like put that as supplemental information in the financial report altogether. And so we have been accepting like the data late just so that we have it, because then we have all the data like separately from the audit report, but we combine it together to essentially meet the financial report requirement, because statute states that statute talks about an annual financial report as opposed to the itself, but as the audit is part overall.
So we've asked them to provide this information through a supplemental filing.
Yeah.
And if provided, they would come into compliance.
Correct. That was the case with the next one, the Capital Metro retirement plans. Both of them had sent, well, for both plans, they sent us the audit reports, but they did not have the investment expense disclosures. But just yesterday, they did end up sending us those investment expense disclosures. So that's pending review, but early cursory review of it looks like it has all of the information required. So that plan should be now compliant, and once the review process is done, they should be compliant. For the Dallas Police and Fire pension systems, they are currently awaiting valuation of certain investments within their portfolio, which has delayed their audit report. This is an ongoing thing that happens with them yearly, and so their reports have usually been ready sometimes November, sometimes December. They're anticipating this one might not be ready till early. The San Angelo Firemen's Relief and Retirement Fund is actually now all compliant. We have received all the reports as of last week. And then the University Park Firemen's Relief and Retirement Fund, they did send us a PRB 1000, but we have not received an audit or an annual financial report or a membership report from the plan. And we've tried to reach out for communication with them through phone call, through email, but we have not received any callbacks from them. I've left messages with them, but they haven't.
So clarifying question. You were talking about Dallas, how, you know, they have they have trouble every year being able to provide the reports. This is 12/31/22 reports that are due on July 30, and they have some assets that are not valued by the 7/30 date, correct? So are they allowed to, and I don't know the answer, so I'm truly doing this my own knowledge, are they allowed to use the estimate that they get from the sponsor of that investment and then update it once they get the final audit report, or do they have to wait until the actual audit report is complete first?
I don't know the answer to that, but we can.
It would be nice if they would go ahead and use, they're hopefully getting valuations of some kind long before July, or just portfolio management perspective. If they have to wait for the audit, that's out of their control, but if they can just use an estimate, then they can obviously, rarely does it change much. Audit comes out. But so just for my knowledge, maybe it's help in saying clients that help.
There are no more questions with this list. Move on to the next slide, which is just common reasons that we've basically gathered throughout the years for non-compliance. Certain investment asset reporting not aligned with the audit deadline, similar to the Dallas Police Fire issue just talked about. An auditor receiving necessary information late, which is causing a delay in their final report. We've heard about edits to draft audit reports delaying final approval until the next system board meeting, as the final copy of those audits does need to be approved in the board meeting. Inaccurate or unavailable historical records due to changes in contractors or anyone that they're dealing with to put that together for them. Change from third-party administrator, systems aren't aware of reporting requirements similar to that Arlington issue. And then system board unable to approve final report due to scheduling conflicts.
I appreciate this information going in here, so. Good one. Thank you.
More positive note, the next slide, I'm happy to report that we have 2 new retirement systems that have registered with us since our last board meeting. They are the pension plan for employees of Floresville Electric Light Power System and the University Medical Center Supplemental Retirement. Both of those plans would fall into the 810 category. Our staff has provided orientation for both of these systems. We basically gave them an introduction to the pension review board, went over kind of our duties that we do to help them in the system. We went over an overview of reporting requirements with them, extensive overview of reporting requirements, not just these 3 reports that you see on this report, but all of the reporting, including MET and an overview of the MET program. So,
Can you do that virtually?
yes, we set up virtual team teleconference meetings with them. We had a good discussion.
And this issue has come up a few times now in this meeting, that how familiar the systems are with the requirements of the PRB, what the PRB does. So I think that the whole mention, it's one of the possible changes to our net requirements would be
Be a way to not really necessarily substitute this, but we would still obviously provide these orientations if they would ask for it. Systems, but it's definitely a good way to get board members aware of. For my final slide is just an overview of fiscal year 2023 compliance dates. The red dates are just our most recent upcoming ones. For fiscal year February 28th, 2023, their 60-day deadline would be December 1st, 2023, but there's only 2 systems in that pool, and both of them are compliant this time. And then the next plans that we expect are the June 30th, 2023 fiscal year end date plans, and those are going to be due. And if there are no questions, that concludes my report.
other questions for Mr. Vernon. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. While we're through the actuarial committee agenda, I would like to now call on Ms. Mariah Miller to present items 7B and E, review of PRB pension funding guidelines and guidance for developing a funding policy. Ms. Miller, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, members. My name is Mariah Miller, and I'm the Policy and Communications Manager at PRB. We are currently undergoing a project that proposed draft revisions to both the pension funding guidelines as well as our funding policy guidance. The PRB's pension funding guidelines provides guidance to public retirement systems and their sponsoring governmental entities in meeting their long-term pension obligations. The guidelines were last revised in 2017. That revision allowed for systems with amortization periods between 30 and 40 years, trying to get below 30 years. This was incorporated in the legislation during the 87th session, allowing for systems until 2025 to reduce their amortization periods below 30. Section 802/2011 of the Texas Government Code requires the governing body of the public retirement system, and if they are not a statewide system, its associated governmental entity, they shall jointly develop and adopt a written funding policy that details a plan for achieving a funded ratio equal to or greater than 100%. The PRB published informal guidance as well as an example policy to assist systems with creating their own policies. To date, 96 of those systems have submitted their funding policies to the agency. Next slide. We are proposing updates to the guidelines and the guidance to reflect current statutory retirement requirements and best practices. The systems were originally required to adopt the funding policy by January 1st, 2020. The policies were due to the PRB 30 days after adoption. The PRB first adopted our funding policy guidance and sample policy in October of 2019 that helped systems meet that requirement. As I previously mentioned, 2017 was the last time the pension funding guidelines were revised. Over the past 6 years, there have been more updates to funding best practices as well as the introduction of new statutory requirements. Slide, please. This project will entail proposing updates to the documents based on recent legislation, updates to best practices, and examples from the Texas public retirement systems as detailed on the current slide. Okay, next slide, please. This project is currently underway. Back in August, we began researching and reviewing any updates to best practices. Drafting of both the funding policy guidance and the funding guidelines began last month. We will have drafts ready for the actuarial committee in January, and we will be accepting feedback from both the board and stakeholders. We will be continuing the revision process through the beginning of summer 2024, with the final drafts ready for possible approval in July. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions about this time.
Question for Ms. Miller on upcoming changes to pension funding guidelines.
I have a question.
Madam Chair.
Probably most related to project timeline.
Okay.
Could we also have, a draft of this presented at our March board meeting, understanding that it wouldn't be final, but it would still have to go back to the actual committee again?
Yeah, typically we'll do like a kind of shortened report on the board after a committee meeting, so that's what we can do. We can provide it.
Okay. I just remember when we initially adopted these, it was a multi-board meeting process. I don't know if it would be something that would lend itself to presentation to the final board in July with an expectation that it be approved at that time.
Yeah, I agree with that observation. It was not easy. And it was a big step for this board. It was also a big step for the state to require public pension systems to have a funding policy. It was extraordinary, frankly, to learn that most public pension plans in the state do not have a funding policy. It's sort of, like if you don't care where you're going, it doesn't matter how you get there. The whole idea is to fund these plans. A lot of these plans, no map, no plan to get to the full funding. So it was a big step for the legislature to pass a bill requiring a funding policy. It was a big step for this board to develop these funding guidelines. And as we saw in this chart that came up earlier, we talked about 30 years is a very long time. Something worth taking a look at this board. I don't know that anybody knows the answer to this question, but it would be interesting to know to what extent these funding policies that have been developed match up with what the systems are really doing. So if the system says we're going to amortize unfunded liabilities within another 30 years, this is how we're going to pay for it. I wonder how many of those systems actually have the contribution rates and the return assumptions and so on in place to actually get it, or whether or not it's actually just theoretical. Other comments or questions on this funding policy?
If I might make a clarification as well, July is really just when we're projecting, but when we're projecting that we would have the final drafts to the board, but if more time is necessary.
Again, Marcia Dush,
Ms.
again,
Rush, please.
as we consider changes to these guidelines and guidance, and funding policy examples, I would ask that the staff really think about whether or not it's appropriate to include some benefit equity issues and the role of member contributions. Again, particularly concerned about plans that have tiered benefit structures where future employees are really going to carry the burden of amortizing the unfunded liability they're getting lesser benefits and more of their contribution will go to fund the unfunded. So I think we need to address essentially the roles of member versus employer contributions in the plan.
Good point. Martha, we hear you. Thank you. We are slated for action. I would entertain a motion to direct staff to work with the actuarial committee to review and propose revisions to the PRB funding guidelines and guidance for developing the funding policy. So moved. Seconded. Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Staff has been directed to work with the actuarial committee on this project. Next is Telco Governance Project Overview. Is that you also, Ms. Miller?
Yes, there it is.
Please.
All right. Another project that the PRB is currently working on focuses on the Texas Local Firefighters Return to Tax Systems, or TELRA, their system governance. Next slide, please. The foundations for the TELRA governance project were set several years ago. Back in 2020, the board tasked staff to study Texas system governance, leading the agency to researching the decision-making processes related to contribution and benefit changes, as well as board member qualification requirements. In 2022, the House Pensions, Investments, and Financial Services Committee, FIPS, had an interim charge reviewing TELRA to ensure proper governance and financial oversight. The agency provided testimony on TELRA governance at the FIPS committee meeting on August 16, 2022. Also in 2022, the agency began working with a student group from UT Austin's LBJ School to research TELRA governance. The study that we collaborated with them on concluded back in 2023, earlier this year. Still 2023. Next slide, please. The reason we are focusing this study on TELRA specifically is because as a whole, TELRA systems are underperforming. There are currently 42 TELRA systems registered with the PRB. 15 of them have amortization periods exceeding 30 years. 28 of them have funded ratios below 65%. Up to 12 intensive reviews our agency has conducted. 11 of those have been on TELRA systems. And the TELRA systems have the highest average assumed rate of return compared to other system types. The framework for this project has already been laid through past research, so we are predominantly focusing on developing solutions and identifying successful strategies. To do this, we are working with an informal work group comprised of TELRA systems and city representatives. This project has the potential to result in statutory recommendations, new best practices, or informal guidance being created to assist TELRA systems. Next slide. We have a total of 3 work group sessions scheduled. They began last month and they will be going on through December. We will be presenting a draft of our findings to the actuarial committee in January. From that point through the summer, we are continuing our research and developing any deliverables, such as potential recommendations through summer 2024, with the products being proposed to be finalized in September. Whatever research we concluded will be included in our 2023-2024 biannual. And this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you. Other questions for Ms. Miller? TELRA Governance Project. Madam Chair, please.
Thank you. I personally am excited for this project. I think of all the projects that the board makes, this one has the potential to have the most beneficial impact to provide just actionable data to the TELRA systems and states. So I'm really excited that we are undertaking this. I'm also interested to know, and I know we don't know yet, but is it anticipated that we would receive a similar interim charge leading into the next legislative session?
We don't know the answer to that. I mean, obviously there's still a special session too, so I'm not even like, I'm gonna be straight and sure timelines for interim charges at this point, but it's certainly something cool.
I think if we can watch for that and make sure that our proposed timeline aligns with that, so that if there is any contemplated legislation for the next legislative session, we're prepared to be able to advise on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Other comments, questions? I'm going to make a brief comment, and that is, as staff has laid out here, it's difficult to look at the results or the outcomes of the conditions of these software plans and the governance arrangement to conclude that governance arrangement does not have a lot to do with the problem issues these systems. It's been talked about a lot, and it has been studied. As Mariah alluded to, we have the OJ School conducted a study for us, and not only did we get a study out of the deal, we got an employee out of the deal, Noah Jones, back there, came from that, and so we're starting from a great position with somebody who knows about this, as well as other members of staff. Sharing enthusiasm for this project. So we're slated for action on that item as well. I would entertain a motion to direct staff to work with the actuarial committee to research and provide recommendations for regarding software.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Reese, seconded by the chair. Discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Miller.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I hand it back to you.
Thank you. That's fine. Well, move on to the executive director reports.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members. I'm Amy Cardona, the Executive Director of the PRB. Just 3 topics to touch on quickly here. Next slide, please. Items 8A and B are conference.
Just to clarify, you made the motion.
The most recent.
That was recent. Yeah, that was recent.
Items 8A and B are conference updates. Ashley Rendon, the PRB Deputy Director, and I attended the Texas Summer Educational Forum in the Woodlands back in August. And then more recently in October, several PRB staff attended the 2023 annual Telfer Conference in Corpus Christi, and our own PRB staff actuary David Fee moderated an actuarial panel composed of 4 other actuaries that all work with Telfer systems. It was a great discussion, and we're so glad that David invited us. Next slide. Item 8C, quick staff update. Our financial analyst, Matt Featherston, did leave the agency in September. So for now, in lieu of posting a full-time position, we've posted 2 part-time temporary positions, essentially internships. So we're trying something a little bit new. One position is an actuarial intern position, and the other is a financial analyst. We have applications for both of those. Any ideas that those would be positions through the spring semester, starting in January. Semester. And we've been targeting our advertising and working in particular with their team actual schools. Next slide. And then item 8D is just an updated FY 2024 operating budget for the board's information. And that concludes my remarks on item 8.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item number 9, future meetings, agenda items, dates, locations, and other arrangements. There will be an investment committee meeting following today's meeting at 2:00 today in the same room. On January 25th, 2024 at 10 a.m., the actuarial committee will meet with the location to be determined. The next board meeting will take place March 6th, 2024. 10 o'clock in the morning with a location to be determined. All meetings for 2024 have been currently scheduled and are available on the PRB website. Does the board have any agenda items that they'd like to place on future board agendas? Okay. Hearing none, if there's no further business at this board and no objection, I'll move to adjourn the meeting.